And this afternoon, leaders at the G7 are on their way from Bavaria to Madrid for another key summit dominated by the war in Ukraine. That is the NATO summit, which is also kicking off this afternoon. And speaking a short while ago, its Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the alliance was now operating in a more dangerous and unpredictable world. He also said the Russian invasion of Ukraine had prompted a fundamental shift in NATO's approach to defence. Have a listen.
The Madrid summit will be a pivotal summit. We will agree a new strategic concept, the Madrid strategic concept, that will be the blueprint for NATO in a more dangerous and unpredictable world. We will agree a fundamental shift to our deterrence and defence, with more high readiness forces, with more forward defence, with more pre-positioned equipment. We will agree a comprehensive assistance package to Ukraine, to help them uphold the right for self-defence.
Well, France 24's Dave Keating is covering developments for us today. Dave, just tell us what's on the table then at this summit.
Well, what's interesting is this summit was envisioned well before the Ukraine war to set this new strategic concept. And the thinking was it would prepare NATO for its next phase, when NATO would be looking more to China as an adversary, or NATO would be looking more at terrorism. In other words, that NATO would be transitioning away from its original purpose, which was to counter Russian aggression. But then the Ukraine war happened, and then we're right back to NATO's original mission. So ironically, even though this summit in Madrid was initially envisioned as something that would change NATO, what we've ended up with is a summit that will probably return it back to where it was, return it back to its original mission. Funny enough, back in 2010, when the first strategic concept was adopted, the Russian president was in attendance, and that document defined Russia as a strategic partner. Secretary General Stoltenberg said yesterday that will definitely not be the case this time, that the document will very clearly outline Russia as the biggest danger to world stability at the moment. But the key question here over the next days in Madrid is whether or not they're going to maintain that focus on China, maintain that new shift toward NATO looking at terrorism, or whether they will really focus on the bedrock here, which was, after all, the reason for NATO's founding: countering Russian aggression.
Yes, Dave, and we'll talk much more about how NATO is changing as a result of the war in Ukraine later on. But in other news coming out of Stoltenberg's address today, he said that for the first time, NATO is planning to cut its emissions, or make that a priority. In fact, he said that the alliance would try to be carbon neutral by 2050. Why is NATO doing this now?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, because NATO is, of course, a military alliance, and so you might not expect this climate pledge from NATO, but Secretary General Stoltenberg says it has a lot of relevance for the military. For instance, they have to get new equipment for extreme heat or extreme cold. The rising sea levels could be affecting NATO naval bases. Hurricanes could be affecting airstrips. And so he laid out these targets that all the members have agreed to. But if you look at the fine print here, it's not really much of a target, because there is huge overlap between European Union members and NATO members, and that 2050 target of having net zero emissions, that's already an EU target. And then they have an interim target for 2030 of reducing emissions by 45% for all NATO members. Well, for the EU, it's 55%. So actually, this target set by NATO is a step down from most of its members. This really only is an ambitious new policy for the United States and Turkey. Those are the only two members that don't have as ambitious of a target that was set here today. That being said, I doubt how much this NATO target is really going to translate into domestic U.S. legislation. But of course, Turkey has not been a major cooperative country on climate legislation. It notoriously dragged its feet in signing the Paris Accord. So it is a big step for Turkey to be signing up to this. And certainly, I think Stoltenberg wants to maintain this focus on climate issues. Again, trying to find NATO's place in the world, not just being just about Russia, but also looking at new ways that NATO can contribute. Of course, they have a lot of research, a lot of defense research that's involved with NATO, and that defense research can actually be really crucial for combating climate change and for identifying trends in climate change. This will be an interesting area to watch.
Dave Keating, for now, thanks very much.